everyone, this is BioPhoenix here. So today we're going to be talking about an RPG series that I actually did talk a little bit about before, and that being Growlanser. So I already did a review on Growlanser Generations on PS2, which came with Growlanser 2 and 3, and I enjoyed them quite a lot. Mostly 3 for its gameplay, but I did like the story in 2 a little bit more. But in case you haven't seen that review, I'll just sum up what you need to know quickly. So this is a tactical RPG series that is actually a spiritual successor to Landgrisser, and speaking of that, we're actually getting a remake of that. So all the games were developed by Careersoft, and the Growlanser Generations was published by Working Design, and it was actually their last game before they went under. But after that, whenever a game from the series came out over here, it was published by Atlas, which they've always published the games in Japan. So the one I'm taking a look at today is Growlanser 4, Wayfarer of Time. And there were different versions of the game, so the original version was on the PS2 and it was only released in Japan in 2003. And then there's the PSP version, which is the one I'm taking a look at, and this one came out in Japan in 2011 and over here in 2012. So this version I'm taking a look at is pretty much like the Persona 4 Golden of Growlanser 4. So basically, a lot of it is the same stuff, but it does add in a few new things to it. And one of those many new things is newer characters. So without further ado, let's talk about the game's story. So 2,000 years ago, human civilization was able to progress very far within magic and science. But that all came to an end when the angels ended up attacking the humans and almost making them go extinct. But eventually the humans repopulated and ended up rebuilding everything. But all the super advanced technologies that they had before though were forgotten. So it takes us to the present day of this game where you control a character named Crevenil, I don't know, I have no idea how it's pronounced, but I'm just gonna call him Crev. So he was taken in and raised by a character named Dixon, who happened to be the leader of a mercenary group, so Crev was pretty much raised to be a mercenary. Also, he is a silent protagonist, so knowing that, you actually get to make a lot of choices that he says. So one day, Crev and the daughter of Dixon, named Regina, end up walking down the road, and eventually they see a random dude lying on the ground, and that happened to be Ramus. So Ramus ends up joining forces with them, despite not having any combat experience. So for the first little bit, you do some mercenary things, but then an explosion happens, and when you look up into the sky, you see a six-winged angel. Yeah, not a one-winged angel, a six-winged, so watch the fuck out. So yes, the angels are coming back and are trying to destroy everything. So as of right now, Krev's main goal is that he wants to try and find a way to defeat the angels. But it's a pretty tough thing to do when there's like a war breaking out between all the different countries on the island. But yeah, that pretty much sums up what you need to know about the story, so of course there's a lot of shit that goes into here, but I'm not gonna go into like too much crazy detail because trust me, like, there's a lot. But I will talk about two more characters that do join up with you and do pretty much stick around for most of the game, so that happens to be Frayne, who happens to be a ruined child who happens to be a survivor of what happened 2,000 years ago and she doesn't remember anything. And then there's Eliza, who happens to be a noblewoman who has been sheltered throughout most of her life and wants to finally experience things. Now obviously, there's like tons of other characters, like there's other characters that join your party, there's also ones that like temporarily join but they're guests, and of course just many other side characters. And if I were to go through them all, we'd be here forever, but if I had to name like my 3 favorite characters though that were not the ones that I mentioned, it'd probably have to be the Royal Guards. And they happen to be Diana, Alphonse, and Christopher. But I do have to give some bonus points for Christopher because not only is he really funny in the game, but also he happens to have my real life name. And there's a lot of stuff that could potentially happen with all these characters, but I'll get more into that in a bit. So for now, let's get moving on to the game's gameplay. So this game is very similar to the third game, so it has the same old exploration with towns and dungeons and world maps. And one good thing that they did add in this one is that on the world map, you can actually see the enemies, it's not random encounters anymore. And the game's combat is pretty much the same as before, but I'll still go over it for those that are new. So it is a strategy RPG, and it is turn-based, but it doesn't have a grid. And all the characters have a weight meter, and once the weight meter is up, then you get to select what they can do. So you got your typical attack, magic, items, all that. But one new thing that they did add is that every character actually has some sort of limit break, but the way how it works is that you have to meet certain requirements in order to do so. And there are some requirements that involve having low HP, so meaning that if you are getting your ass kicked, well, it's not always a bad thing. And just like the other games, you have skills and different magics that you can level up, but this time, you don't level them up whenever your character levels up. You have additional EXP that goes towards your skills, your magic, and your knacks, and no, not knacks as in the PS4 game, but instead knacks are pretty much like other skills, like magic resist up or max HP up, you know, stuff like that. So you acquire more EXP for these whenever a party member kills an enemy by finishing it off. And it also depends on which things you equip with your ring weapon. Now, the equipment system in this game is pretty much the same as before. It's very customizable, but this time though, they did add something in here that requires a little bit more thinking power. So you can equip 3 different skills to your rings. And as you would expect, the number on the ring means that you can equip a skill of that level or lower. And just by the way, if you equip the ring long enough, you can actually get the numbers higher. Or using the item fairies tier also helps too. So that's all the same, but the thing that they did change up though is the different colors, so you have green, yellow, and red. So if you equip a green skill on a green slot, then whatever magic or knack that is equipped with that skill, then it actually does gain more EXP whenever you finish off an enemy. Now you can equip different colored skills onto different slots, but doing so actually does slow the process, where you actually don't get as much EXP for your knacks and such. So it's recommended to try to equip as much matching colors as possible. I'm telling you this now because I had to learn this the hard way. So you still have a lot of customization that you can do with all the characters, which is great. But they did change it up a little bit, which does get the brain going a bit, because you really do have to think about different skills that you gotta equip with different rings. So there are still many other things I have to talk about, like the familiars. So in the game, you actually do get a fairy's egg, and whenever you get the dollhouse to put the egg inside, then you can actually be able to pick some choices, and depending on the choices that you pick, your fairy could look 3 different ways. It could have short hair, it could have long hair, or it could look like Raimi from the 3rd game. So what the familiars do in this game is that it's pretty much a support for your main character, Krev. So every so often, you'll acquire some more points to level up your fairy. And you'll raise newer skills depending on which ones that you raise. So for an example, if you raise the physical, you can actually do a guard physical every once in a while. Of course it happens automatically, you don't choose whenever it happens, but still, it's something that is very important and very helpful. And if you really give a shit, you can actually change the clothing of your fairy, and of course you can unlock newer clothing, and as you would expect, they probably do have an outfit that fits your fetish, so go nuts. And speaking of all the waifu things, there is a relationship system in this one as well. So throughout the story, depending on what choices you pick, they actually do affect your party members. Yeah, we all know there's a lot of games out there that if you pick like the more like sarcastic response, you know, you'll get your typical, oh, just get a fucking grip, and then after that, like, they won't question it ever again. Well, in this game, it will actually affect something. But every now and again, you actually do have moments where you actually do return to your main base, and you can actually have these, like, time off times where you can actually, like, talk with your party members and do different things. And by the way, there's, like, a ton of different endings in the game, and that's mainly because most of the characters in this game actually do have, like, some epilogue endings, kinda similar to what Valkyrie Profile 1 had. So the romance system in this game is very straightforward, especially compared to other games like the later Persona games and even the Trails series. So that pretty much covers all the main features that carry over from the older games and also some new features as well. So now let's get moving on and start talking about the game's graphics, and I think it is an improvement over the other 2 games. At least for the most part, but the big thing I did notice is that the backgrounds in this one are much more brighter colors and are much more sharper. Now yes, it still has that pre-rendered background look, but I find it does look nicer here though compared to the other 2, where those 2, the backgrounds in that one were kind of mixed for me. Like there were some parts that looked nice, but then there was a lot of other parts that just looked really dull. Like there was a lot of like dark green and like brown and gray and shit. Also, most of the character and monster sprites are pretty much the same as before, so they haven't changed at all. But I can see that it does look a little bit uneven, especially when you look at them compared to a sprite of a newer character where it just looks much more detailed. But as you would expect coming from me though, is that the character design in this game is just fucking awesome. So it's the same artist as before, Satoshi Yorishihara, who is definitely one of my all-time favorites. And I can gush about it like all day long, but you know, we have like other things to talk about with this game. But to sum up the point though, I really love it a whole lot and I really wish he did more stuff. But overall, I do think that the graphics in this one are much better improvement over the other games, although I guess that's expected given that this is like an enhanced remake on PSP, but I still think it does look pretty good for what it is. But the art direction is definitely the showstopper. And now, as for the game's music, the music in this one is actually really great, and I would actually say that it probably might be like one of my favorite soundtracks within the series. And that really says a lot, because I really did love the OST for the second game, and yeah, I also did like it for the third game, even though I know I did say that a lot of the tracks were not that memorable, but here's the thing though, I have to correct something, is that it was the dungeon music that was just really unmemorable, and it also did repeat itself a lot. But all the other tracks though were still really good, even the ones that were arranged, so yeah, number 3's OST is still really good. It's just something I had to address because it's something I realized that, oops, I kinda fucked up. But anyways, the music in this one though, I just think is just really good. Like, you got like a lot of really great battle music, you got a lot of great tense music, some sad music, I mean, there's just a lot of variety here. So personally, I do find that the OST for this game is definitely worth listening to. And now, as for the game's voice acting, well, in this game, there's barely any voices at all. The only parts in the game that actually do have voices in it are within the anime cutscenes, and there's not a whole lot of them, and whenever there is them, they're not that long, so yeah, you don't really get a chance to hear enough of it. The only voices I was able to recognize, but I can't confirm if it actually was them, but I actually did recognize that Sam Riegel was in here and even Christina V, but like I said, that's just going by ear. It's just a tiny bit unfortunate there's no voice acting in here. I mean, I can live without it, honestly, it's no big deal, but just going from like 2 and 3, those games had like a lot of voice lines in them, and you go from that to this, it's just, you know, kind of weird. But then again though, the voice acting in 2 and 3 were pretty damn bad, but they were like the so bad that it was good, so it was at least enjoyable to me. So yeah, I figured I'd cover that real quick. So now, if you wanted to go out and buy this game, from the few that I'm seeing on here, so you got used ones going for about 30 to 35, then you got brand new ones that are going for like 50 bucks. I guess for a brand new Atlas RPG on PSP, I guess $50 isn't that bad. I mean, I was expecting a lot worse. But yeah, the prices aren't too terrible. I mean, at least this game is a lot cheaper than trying to get like the collector's edition of Growlanser Generations, that's for sure. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Growlanser 4, Wayfarer of Time, is that this game is not only great, but it's actually my favorite in the series. Yeah, I like it better than the 2 games in Generations. So the story was not only really interesting, but also did have a lot of great character moments. And there were some pretty cool twists and turns that I thought were a pretty good surprise. And it pretty much takes everything that was already great about 3 and expands upon it even more. And one thing I forgot to mention, but I figured I'd mention it now, but in this game, you can actually change the fate of certain characters, so meaning that if there's a character that could potentially die at a certain scene, you could actually change their fate and actually save them. Not only do I really like this feature for that potentially if my favorite character could die, I could actually save them, but also, I do think that it also adds more replay value to see what would happen if you saved them or not, if depending on what you did on your first playthrough. So this game does what FF7 and Persona 3 don't. But all joking aside, it is a pretty cool feature to add in. But I have to mention, as much as I do love this game though, this game is also pretty fucking hard. And out of 2, 3, and 4, this one is probably the hardest one in my opinion. Now it is easier than 2 in the sense that, like, it's easier to figure out where the hell you're supposed to go, but it's the battles that can get really challenging. But thankfully, the game does start out pretty easy and does work its way up to being really hard, which I do think is fair. But I think the biggest thing that does make this game hard is that I find that the grinding in this game can take quite a while with trying to level up those different skills, knacks, and magic. And on top of that, you're trying to level them up with like each character. And when you're at the halfway point through the game, you don't have like a whole lot of different grinding spots to go to, so sometimes it feels like it can take longer to get through. So knowing this, overall, the game is not easy, and therefore, it is a little bit tough to recommend for that. I know not everyone is a fan of tactical strategy RPGs, but if you do like them, and you also do want a good story and a good challenge, then yeah, I would recommend it. But as for newer players though, that might be a bit tough. I'd say that if you are new to the series, I still think that trying out 3 first would be your best bet, because 3 is still really good, and for the most part, it is a much more easier game to get into, even though that one also does get pretty tough, but I found that it's not nearly as tough as this one. But I have to say, as much as I do love this game, it does have one mission where you have to defend like 3 flags, and if 2 of the flags go down, then it's game over automatically. Well, that mission can go fuck itself, but other than that, this is a pretty great game. And I was not disappointed whatsoever. But before I end it though, I do have to mention that after the original PS2 version came out, they also did make another version called Growlanser 4 Returns, but it's actually a visual novel that also came with an OVA that takes place after the story of the main 4. Just figured I'd mention that it exists out there, but yeah, that pretty much covers it, so yes, Growlanser 4 is definitely a great game that I really enjoyed a hell lot. And it's another Atlas game that totally kicks the living shit out of that other shitty one that I played recently. What was it, like Armored Police Metal Jack? Yeah, as much as I hated that flag mission, I'd rather replay that mission than have to play that game ever again. So, anyways, with that said, thanks for watching, commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Should we gather for whiskey and cigars tonight? Indeed, I believe so.
That's it! I've come up with a new recipe.